Good afternoon and welcome to the COVID-19 Preparedness webinar series by the Max Institute of Healthcare Management at the Indian School of Business. I'm Soumya Shashidhara, the Associate Director at the Institute and the host of the series. For those of you who are on our webinar for the first time, the Max Institute at the ISB is an interdisciplinary specialist institute that generates insights and applies management thinking for creation of a better health system. This webinar is in association with ISB's Center for Business Markets and Equitable Healthcare Access Consortium. Today's webinar is by Professor Shlomo Maital, titled Creativity versus Corona, How Innovative Minds Enlist to Save Humanity. Professor Maital is Emeritus Professor and Head of Zivi Griliches Research Data Center at the Samuel Neaman Institute for Advanced Studies in Science and Technology at the Israeli Institute of Technology. Professor Maital, welcome to our webinar and thank you so much for sparing your time and look forward to your session. Professor Maital will be talking about agility, resilience, skill, the three essential qualities of innovators that have come to fore during the current pandemic. And he offers some very interesting stories from Israel and India and some frameworks that we can all take back home to look at innovation during this period. We have Professor Divya Seshadri, Clinical Professor of Marketing at Indian School of Business and Executive Director of ISB Center for Business Markets and Secretary of Equitable Healthcare Access Consortium with us. He's the person who brought all of us together and also invited Professor Maital for this very interesting session. And they both have been co-authors at a case study that has been recently published in the Harvard Business Publishing titled LV Prasad Eye Institute, Innovating the Business of Eye Care. Professor Seshadri, thank you so much for your contribution to everything that the Max Institute does in healthcare. And also to mention, Professor Divya teaches two courses at our ISB's Advanced Management Program for Healthcare, a modular program for senior executives from healthcare delivery organization. One he teaches on strategy of business healthcare organization, and the second one on business model innovation and entrepreneurial mindset. I now invite Professor Seshadri to introduce Professor Maital and start off the session. Professor Seshadri, over to you, please.
So, friends, it's my pleasure, privilege, honor to introduce Professor Shlomo Maital, a very dear friend of mine for almost 20 years. We just had a, I can say, love at first sight in some conference in Singapore 2 decades ago. Our eyes crossed each other and then we shook hands and then somehow there was a connect, almost like a past life connection. And since then, we have been, although we have met maybe 7 or 8 times in the intervening years, we have been fairly closely in touch. I also had the privilege of co-authoring with him 4 books, primarily in the realm of innovation. I think he's the best person to talk to us on innovation in these times when actually the world has its back pasted on the wall. Nobody knows what's the way forward, and the only key to get us out will be massive innovation. And that's where this title is very relevant, Creativity versus Corona. How innovative minds enlist to save humanity. As the introduction, a formal introduction which he requested to keep short, he's the Emeritus Professor at the Griliches Research Data Center at Samuel Neaman Institute, Technion-Israel Institute of Technology. He was the academic director of Technion Institute of Management, which used to teach a huge battery of leading executives on leadership and innovation for almost 2 decades. For about 20 years, he taught at MIT in Boston on technology innovation, and he trained executives from over 200 companies from across the world. He's one of the few people who has taught at multiple geographies, including in Europe, India, China, US, of course, Canada, and I'm aware that he would have probably taught full courses on innovation to more than a dozen countries. So his talk is very, very timely. We are all really looking forward to it. And he has published 14 books, apart from numerous papers running into several hundred on his topics of interest. The books are Innovation Management, Dismantle Building Your Personal Creativity Machine, Innovate Your Innovation Process, Cracking the Creativity Code, Imagination Leader, Technion Nation, Global Risk and Global Opportunity, Smartonomics. This is only a sample of his books. And who better to talk about innovation in these difficult times than him? For two reasons, he himself has spent a lifetime of more than 5 decades delving deep into this topic. And then Israel is about undoubtedly the most innovative country in the world. The world looks up to them for innovation in defense, software, encryptions, and then healthcare, and zillions of other things, including agriculture and so on. So, and also India and Israel are very dear friends. A word about the two centers that are co-sponsoring this, apart from Max Institute, which Soumya has talked about. The Equitable Healthcare Access Consortium is an umbrella where like-minded people come together to essentially come up with new business models, learn from each other on how healthcare, livelihood, and education can be provided to all, irrespective of their ability to pay. The Center for Business Markets at ISB is basically a platform where companies that are in B2B markets come together to exchange information with academics and learn from each other. So without further ado, over to Professor Shlomo Maital. Sincere thanks, my dear friend. He has 4 lovely children spread between New York, Los Angeles, and Israel, and a very happy family of many grandchildren. His wife Sharona and he lead a wonderful, very fulfilled life. They spend a lot of time in the synagogue, which is the center of their actually life. And he's also a health freak, if I may add. He has climbed the Mount Kilimanjaro very recently. He runs marathons, including Boston Marathon. And if I tell you, many of you will swoon. He's, you will figure out his age, but he looks about half as young. So over to Professor Shlomo Maital.
Thank you, my friend Seshadri. Thank you so much. I think, could you mute your microphone, Seshadri? I think we have an echo.
Don't do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, we have 360 participants, 368 at counting. That's amazing. Thank you all for joining. It's a great honor for me to talk to you about creativity and Corona. In terms of how we'll operate our session together, I hope you can see my PowerPoint on your screen. I'd like to receive your questions by chat or by Q&A on Zoom. I've already made a list of about 10 of your excellent questions, and I'll try to address them during our webcast. I'll also leave time toward the end, but I prefer having your questions in a written form. And if you give me your name, I'll mention your name as well. At the end of the broadcast, I'll provide you with my email. And if I don't answer your questions, I can't get to them all. I hope to hear from you by email. I answer promptly. And I'd love to hear from my friends in India. I want to say a word about India and Israel. I just love India. I've been to India many times, taught in India. My books are all published in India. The reason is simply that they're produced beautifully, quickly, and they're 1/4 the price of books published in America. India and Israel are very similar. That sounds really strange because India has almost 1.4 billion people and Israel has 9 million. You are 150 times bigger than we are, but we make a lot more noise than you do. Sometimes I wish we would be a lot quieter. India and Israel have many things in common. We are both very, very old civilizations, thousands of years, reborn as new countries. India was born on August 15th, 1947, and 273 days later, on May 14th, 1948, Israel was born as an independent country, and we both had to throw off the yoke of the British, which at times was very heavy. One more thing that we have in common, Indians and Israelis. We've both been through very hard times, and we are resilient people. We know how to absorb the punches and bounce back. And I'm going to talk a lot about resilience because it's highly relevant during the time of Corona. So thank you, my friends from India, for joining the broadcast and for giving me the chance to speak with you. And I'm going to tell you a lot of stories. After many years of teaching, as an economist accustomed to throwing equations on the board, I realized that truth lies in personal stories about real people. But I also want to use those stories to bring you a kind of tool or a formula for how we deal with this virus. The main resource we have to deal with it is not going to be money or laboratories or tests or anything else. It's going to be the human mind and our ability to innovate flexibly and in an agile manner. So I'm going to speak about stories about creative people, mostly from Israel. I live here, and this is what I know. But I'm sure you have many, many similar stories among Indian innovators and entrepreneurs as well. And I'll mention perhaps one or two of them. So on your screen, there are two pictures. Let me talk about the picture on the right. That picture is of Mumbai. Mumbai has had some severe flooding. You had a big flood during the monsoon rains in 2005 and again in 2017. I think that picture is from a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, during the monsoon flooding. And it's a picture of Mumbai office workers dressed in their suits and ties and dressed to kill. The public transportation was shut down because the electricity was shut off to avoid electrocution. So they had no way to get home except to walk. So the people from the office buildings came down and walked home through waist-high water, and they just did it because they were resilient and they were flexible. And in a way, the metaphor for flexibility, the quality that we need today during this terrible pandemic, is the palm tree. You have palm trees in southern India. We have many palm trees here in Israel and the Mideast. Palm trees are built for storms. And when we get high winds, sometimes storms, you get typhoons, cyclones, palm trees survive. Other trees sometimes are uprooted and they break, but palm trees rarely do. And the reason is simple, because they bend, they're flexible, they're able to bend in the wind almost to the ground, and then they bounce back. And that's the human quality that we all need during these really hard times when many people are out of work, our incomes have fallen, we live in fear. We live in fear of this awful virus, which makes people really ill. And we need this quality of the palm tree of resilience, of bending with the blows and then bouncing back as quickly as we can. The people of Mumbai have it. The people of India have that. I believe we are also resilient in Israel as well. We need to be like rubber bands. We need to be flexible, able to bounce back. And I'm going to talk about that.
Shlomo, if I may interrupt, there's a request to display your PowerPoint on a presentation mode.
Yes, I'd rather not do that because I want to be able to use the pointer, and also to from time to time to write on it, and I can't do that in presentation mode. Also, I want to be able to follow the. I want to be able to follow the chats. All right, we'll do that. I'll do it. I'll do it. Thank you, Seshadri. So I want to provide you with a tool. I think that every one of us, as professionals, managers, leaders, workers, family members, individuals, a very simple tool for dealing with this terrible pandemic. And with this tool, I believe that all of us can go far. We can create value for ourselves, our family, our organizations, our country. And the tool will let us go far, and FAR is an acronym. We need flexibility, we need agility, and we need resilience. Let me define those terms and then tell some stories about those three qualities among people who are creative and creating value during the pandemic. Flexibility is the quality of bending without breaking. As we mentioned, the palm tree. Related to flexibility, the palm tree doesn't move. It bends, but of course it can't move from its place. But agility, the second part of going far. Agility does involve movement. It involves the ability to think, to understand, to adapt, and then move quickly in response to challenges. Read the map, identify the challenge, think about what do I know that could be useful during this emergency, during this crisis, and then move and move quickly. The ability to pivot, sometimes to change direction. So a number of my stories are about startups in Israel who have a product designed for something totally different. Along comes the coronavirus, and that service or product, that innovation is adapted, pivoted, changes direction in order to create value to meet the crisis or the emergency. And related to flexibility and agility is the quality of resilience. That's the ability to recover quickly from failure and decline. So toward the end, I'm going to put my hat on as an economist and talk about the global economy and the terrible price that the world is going to pay for this pandemic and what we may expect and why resilience is going to be so crucial. And there are going to be countries that suffer greatly and sink, and there are going to be countries that bounce back. And that quality of resilience is going to prove crucial for Israel and for India as well. So let's begin with our story about creative people and innovative people and leaders. And I'd like to begin by talking about Kerala. Kerala province in southern India. This is something I've read about. I think I read about it in The Guardian. And it's a wonderful story. This is the health minister of Kerala. Her name is KK Shailaja. She's called Shailaja Teacher. She was a former teacher. And the story is that in her province, in the state of Kerala, she phoned one of her deputies at the end of January. She had been following what was going on in China, unlike many other people abroad who were asleep. And she heard about this new virus spreading in China on January 20th. She talked to her experts, her health experts, her epidemiologists. She asked them, is this going to come to India? They said yes. And so she began to get ready. She began her preparations the end of January, well before many other countries, including the United States, where the president was denying that this thing was of any importance at all. Kerala has had relatively little episodes of coronavirus, relatively few deaths, largely because there were preparations put in place. The political leaders listened to the experts, the medical experts, including the health minister Shailaja. The result was many lives were saved. This is worth a case study, something that we can learn from. So we salute Kerala and KK Shailaja and the people of Kerala as well. It's not just enough for the health authorities to impose lockdown. The people have to understand and have to engage in it. In some countries, like America, people are citing the Constitution and their right not to wear masks and to avoid lockdown, to violate lockdown, and to infect other people because it's their constitutional right not to have the government tell them what to do. And the result has been disaster, with over 100,000 deaths in the United States, and the count is still rising. So congratulations to India and to to Kerala, and to India as a whole, which has done relatively well in managing this awful crisis. So how do we go far during this crisis? The first component of 3 is flexibility, the quality of bending without breaking. Absorb the blow and then bounce back. Those are 2 steps, kind of from the boxing world. In boxing, to win bouts, you have to be able to take a blow. I once tried boxing as a student. I was really poor at it, and I didn't take blows very well. But part of flexibility is a 2-stage process. Absorb the blow, and then think about, okay, now how do I come back? Take the blow and punch back in the ring. So let me tell you a story that I know personally about 2 young people, and 1 senior. And we seniors, we have much to contribute. I'll talk about that a bit later. So the 3 people you see on your screen, they are Yonatan Amir, Technion graduate. Next to him in the middle is Kira Radinsky, Technion graduate, computer science. And next to her is Professor Moshe Shoham, Technion professor, mechanical engineering, and a brilliant entrepreneur and innovator. Here's their story about their company called Diagnostic Robotics. First, a word about Kira, this amazing young lady in the middle. So she began studying at Technion when she was 15. Kira emigrated to Israel from the Ukraine as a child. She proved to be a prodigy. She began studying at the Technion when she was 15. Incidentally, we have a program here in Israel for starting scientists young. So children who show promise, who are good at programming, we enroll them in Technion and university courses. Sometimes they can finish their degrees before they have to go off to the army. Kira was one of those. And she got her degree and then went to the army, worked, of course, as a computer expert, contributed, and she won the coveted Israel Prize for defense, and she was only 19. This is quite amazing for a 19-year-old to do that. She got her PhD, she married, she has a black belt in karate, and she launched a startup. She'd done all of this by the time she was only 27. Quite amazing. So the company that she started with her 2 partners wanted to solve or help solve the problem of embattled emergency rooms. Emergency rooms in hospitals in Israel and elsewhere are embattled because often they're overcrowded with desperate people who are ill, and it's hard to deal with them all. Sometimes there's violence, people are upset, why isn't my mother being treated? Patients wait for hours. And the question is, do we have tools to help deal with that? So they developed artificial intelligence software to help triage, to help decide who really needs care right away, who needs the care, and who can wait. And can we help hospitals prepare in advance rather than just improvise? So that was the product. And then in March, along came the coronavirus. And starting the first week of March, they put together a team. They began to work around the clock to see if they could adapt their platform, their artificial intelligence, to deal with the virus. They wanted to create a one-stop shop for managing the disease end-to-end, centralized solution for COVID-19 treatment. Gather data on number of people in hotspots who are ill, ages, nature of the illness, facilities available, and then use artificial intelligence to help hospitals prepare for people who will be coming for treatment, who will be ill, and prepare in advance rather than have to improvise and simply react. I might mention that this software has been provided to the state of Odisha. In India, it's being used in the state of Rhode Island in the US, and of course, used in Israel. It's a good example of flexibility and agility that we'll talk about in a moment. All of us can do this. Maybe not all of us can use artificial intelligence, but we all can ask, what is it that I know that could be useful in dealing with this pandemic? My own response, by the way, has been words. I'm a professor, I deal in words. So I've been writing a blog a day, or perhaps more than that. I have over 70 of them that I've written so far, trying to help people understand what is going on. And my tool has been words to try to create value and use what I know to respond to the crisis. All of us can do the same. What is it that I know that could potentially be useful and helpful to someone, small and large groups, during this terrible crisis? The second component of our three-part toolbox is agility. Flexibility is the palm tree absorbing the blow, the boxer absorbing the blow in the ring. Agility is movement, the ability to think, understand, adapt, and move quickly in response to challenge. The ability to pivot sometimes. My product or service, my innovation is going in this direction. Suddenly I have to make a 90-degree turn or a 180-degree turn to go back. And I'd like to tell you a story about agility as well, which is going to be important for individuals, for businesses, and for whole countries to be agile in the coming difficult period that we face. On the screen, you can see an unusual entrepreneur. His name is Jack Ma. Jack Ma is a Chinese entrepreneur. He founded Alibaba in 1999, I believe. Jack Ma is not a computer expert, although his company Alibaba is a technology company, online marketing, online sales. Jack Ma learned English by bicycling to West Lake in Hangzhou, China, talking to the tourists and learning English. And he became a translator. On a trip to the US, he saw the internet, he saw the possibilities, even though he knew nothing about computers. And he launched one of the world's great companies, Alibaba. What is the story about Jack Ma's agility that we can learn from? So Alibaba was a young company, about 4 years old. It had some 400 staff members, just getting rolling. And all of a sudden, in 2003, in the spring of 2003, came the SARS crisis. Also, a virus, a deadly virus, a virus that affected respiration, acute respiratory syndrome, and the entire office of Alibaba in China was put under quarantine. In fact, all of the major cities of China were placed under quarantine. Everything shut down. So this was a major blow. 400 staff members of Alibaba took their big computers. We didn't have laptops at that time. They had desktops. They lugged their computers home, and they worked from home and communicated by telephone. They found that one of the staff may actually have been infected by SARS, and as a result, everybody in the company was going to go into lockdown, and their doors were going to be locked from the outside. Jack Ma realized that they were all about to be quarantined and shut down, and each person would be working from home. Now, leaders can either sort of shut down during a crisis, and I see many organizations that are doing that, shutting down, or they can seize the opportunity and be agile. Jack Ma decided to be agile, and he decided this is a good time for Alibaba to take on its biggest threat, eBay. And eBay was active in China, headed by Meg Whitman, older company with deep pockets, $40 billion company, 147 million users worldwide, And little Alibaba was about to take on eBay by creating online sales and marketing platform at a time when everything was shut down during SARS. It sounds crazy, it sounds strange, but there's a lesson here. And the lesson is the time when markets are disrupted and reorganized, reordered, is precisely during recessions, during economic downturns. So in good times, there are market leaders and they more or less keep their position. They have deep pockets. It's really hard to displace them. But in a recession, many companies pull in their horns, fasten their seatbelts, cut their spending, and try to survive. And other companies use the time to innovate and to try and take on the big competitors, and some succeed. This is agility. Alibaba succeeded, and eventually I think eBay actually left China because they weren't able to compete with the Taobao platform that Jack Ma developed during the time of the lockdown, the shutdown of SARS. So this is a lesson for managers, for professors, management, for individuals. Market leadership changes far more during downturns than during booms. And in fact, we are now we're in the midst of, at the beginning of the mother of all economic downturns, greater than the Great Depression of the 1930s. And many companies will sink, including big ones, and some companies will forge ahead because they will use flexibility and agility and resilience, like Alibaba, in order to innovate, to create things of value and adapt to the change in times during great uncertainty. How will people react when they return to their old lives, to shopping? Will they spend similarly? Will they buy more online? Will they go back to stores? Will they enjoy stores? There's so many unanswered questions that we don't know. So we need people of vision who can look into the future, take calculated risks, gather together scarce resources, and use agility in order to pivot and move toward what the world will need during the recovery, the long, difficult recovery from the pandemic. A story about agility, also from the Technion. On the screen, you can see a Technion professor from the medical school, Professor Joshua Schnittman, along with a student, Dr. Jan Ostrovsky. They're researchers who did research on preemies, on prematurely born babies who have acute respiratory syndrome. Babies born prematurely, their lungs aren't fully developed, so they have trouble breathing. And they lack a substance called surfactant, it's protein in their lungs. That surfactant helps their lungs absorb oxygen and send it to the rest of the body. So they knew about lung distress. Well, part of the coronavirus fatality is the fact that our lungs shut down, that the virus coats our epithelial cells in our lungs and makes it hard for us to breathe. So we have to be put on ventilators, many people. And they decided that maybe the surfactant that they had identified, maybe that could help people suffering from coronavirus. Maybe it could help them breathe, perhaps more even than a ventilator. Problem is that when you inject surfactant into the lungs as a liquid, the liquid kind of drowns the lungs. It drowns the epithelial cells. And that's the opposite of what we do. We want them to help them breathe. So they creatively discovered a way of injecting foam surfactant into patients' lungs. Foam, as you know, has a lot of air, a lot of surface area. So it's not heavy liquid, but yet it still brings the surfactant drug or medicine to the lungs to help patients breathe. This is still undergoing clinical trials. Of course, it has to go through clinical trials, but it could be very helpful in lowering the death rate from this terrible virus, which shuts down our lungs among some people. Another story about agility. This is about Pluristem. So Pluristem is a startup. This is Yaki Yanai. You can see him on the screen. Young person, young innovator, did a startup, and the startup took stem cells from the placenta. Placenta, of course, is the organ in women's bodies that brings food from the woman's body to the embryo, to the baby. And the placenta has stem cells. So Pluristem harvests the stem cells and then reprograms them to treat people. In some cases, originally, they were treating people who had problems with blood flow to their legs. And the stem cells were reprogrammed to help blood flow to the legs, to help the blood avoid coagulation and so on. They saw the problem, put the team together, and then pivoted, redirected their efforts toward creating proteins that help the body defeat the coronavirus. So the coronavirus has spikes that poke into cells and take over the cells and then reproduce. And the idea is to create proteins that shut down the spikes and that block the virus from getting into human cells. And their stem cells can be reprogrammed to do that by creating a wide range of proteins. And they help the body avoid what are called cytokine storms. So many people die from this terrible virus because the body has an immune reaction and it's overly violent. And the immune reaction itself kills the body rather than just the virus. So this Pluristem stem cell approach can help avoid these so-called cytokine storms. One of our listeners asked a question about senior citizens and what we can do to help the senior citizens who are especially vulnerable during this awful pandemic. And of course, I am one of them. I'm 77. Let me tell you a story about a senior citizen. Some of us senior citizens are a little put off because out of a surplus of love, we are being shut out and shut in and kept in by people who are concerned about our well-being and our vulnerability. And we old guys, we know quite a bit. We can contribute. We have ways that we can help as well, rather than just be locked in and protected in cages. On the screen, you see my friend, Dr. Noam Gavrieli. Noam is a former vice dean of Technion Medical School. He's an expert on respiration, on asthma, on wheezing, and he's also an entrepreneur, and he's started a company that has a wonderful invention. It's a sleeve that you put on the hand or the leg, and when you need to do orthopedic surgery, the sleeve removes the blood from the organ so that surgeons can operate safely and without blood loss. And then the sleeve comes off, the blood comes back in 2 hours, and everything is fine. And this product has been very successful. When the pandemic began, Noam realized he needed to do something. He knew about breathing, about masks, about particles, and created the Vera Mask. The Vera Mask is a different kind of mask. It's made of silicone plastic. It's comfortable, it's soft, it's effective. He put his team together, worked day and night, even though he's going to be 70 years old in October. And in 28 days, this new kind of mask that you see on the screen was being shipped in 28 days. Design, production, testing, supply chain, the whole works. So flexibility, agility, and we old guys, we seniors, we also have a role to play here in this innovation. Now, I want to raise a very interesting and difficult issue. Innovation, creativity is based on breaking the rules. Breaking the rules. Steve Jobs once said something interesting. Steve Jobs said, I'd rather be a pirate than join the Navy. I'm a Navy man. I did reserve duty in the Navy, but I understand what he means. he'd rather break the rules as a pirate than follow the rules. There are many rules in the Navy. So innovation involves breaking the rules. At the same time, we all find ourselves during this lockdown, during social separation, social isolation, we all find ourselves subject to many rules set by health ministries, usually, and we are subject to rule makers, and we are subject to following rules. And the question is, how in the world do we deal with this? So my country, Israel, we're a country of rule breakers. If you've ever driven on our roads, you understand what I mean. We love breaking the rules. Our young people go off to the army, they years or 5 years or whatever. They're following the rules, the discipline, and then they travel for a year just to shake off the discipline and the rules and to get rid of all that discipline that has been foisted on them. By the way, many of them love to go to India for that reason. So there are countries that are rule breaker countries. Israel is one of them. Brazil is another. Brazil has broken the rules regarding social isolation, and they've paid a terrible, terrible price, as the numbers show. India, in some sense, is also a country of rule breakers, but it's also a country of rule makers, and at a time of crisis, I guess the people of India know when you have to follow the rules. So this delicate paradox or balance between breaking the rules and being creative and dealing with the problem, but following the rules and setting the rules so that we can be safe, we can all be safe and not spread this terrible disease. That's a difficult dilemma. America's not dealing with this well. Americans are individualists, and they have a constitution that gives them the right, they think, to do anything. And this is proving difficult as the epidemic spreads in America, and the death toll is just horrendous. So part of creativity versus corona is going to be this tension between rule breaking and rule making, and tight cultures and loose cultures. China's a tight culture. So China can lock down the whole country, even though there are 1.4 billion people. Israel's a loose culture. I think India is a loose, diverse culture as well. And the question is, how will each country organize this this tension between making rules and breaking rules? The book by Michelle Gelfand, who's a sociologist, is really wonderful, and I highly recommend it. We better move along so that I can deal with some of the questions. The last of the letters in the acronym is the R, resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from failure and decline. The economic toll, the economic cost of this crisis is going to be prolonged and very, very difficult. So we need to understand how to be resilient, how we will bounce back. And in order to deal with this, I talked to my friend and colleague at the Neaman Institute, Dr. Reuven Kahl. Reuven is a social and clinical psychologist, and he was the chief psychologist in the Israeli army. And he studied resilience during times of crisis. We've had attacks of terrorism in Israel, buses blowing up, and he has studied what is it that makes individuals resilient and what makes society socially resilient. And I can give you a pretty short answer. Social resilience is the capacity of a society to prepare. Preparation is important, contain and manage major national crises, and to bounce back expeditiously to an enhanced functioning. So we want to bounce back not to where we were, like a rubber band, and we bounce back to what it was. We want to bounce back to an enhanced functioning, to be better. We want to come out of this pandemic as a better, stronger society, a more advanced society. Bottom line from the research of Dr. Gal, in the Yom Kippur War, which is a war in which we were attacked by surprise and faced desperate situation on two fronts, north and south, I myself was called up. Afterwards, many of the soldiers who fought suffered post-trauma. The tank crews who were organic, who had served together as a unit, who knew each other, loved each other, supported each other, they had very little post-trauma. The tank crews who were put together and thrown together when people didn't know each other, after the war, they had post-trauma. And the answer is, the solution is that social support, the support of our loved ones, our friends, our family, those around us, our neighborhood, our community, this is a key element of resilience. And here's a dilemma, and some of you raised this in your questions in the Q&A. We are all being asked to engage in lockdown, social isolation, social separation. And the very term itself is a bad term, and we should not use it. We do not want social separation. That's the last thing we want. We want physical separation to the extent needed, but we want social cohesion. We want people to be together, and we use technology for that. I wrote a blog called Apology to Technology, because I've been critical of many technologies, social media, that have spread fake news. But in fact, it's technology that's enabled us to be together as a family, as friends, to see our grandchildren, to speak to them. So we seek social resilience through social cohesion, even though we are physically separated. And technology has enabled us to do that. Imagine this crisis. Without technology, I wouldn't be able to chat with you. Another key part is leadership. So this is a time for leaders to come to the fore, and we've seen leaders emerge. Incidentally, I've looked carefully at the performance of leaders in various countries. We've had outstanding leadership in Finland, in Norway, in New Zealand, in Germany, in Taiwan. Guess what? The leaders of all those countries are women, many of them highly educated women. Angela Merkel is a quantum chemist. She combines chemistry and physics, trained scientist. The women seem to be able to listen to the experts, to communicate credibly, to put their ego on the shelf, and to lead in a manner that provides credibility. Some countries have had egoistic men who try to take the stage away from the scientists and the leaders. Brazil, United States, even Britain to some extent, and those countries have paid a terrible price. I want to leave a bit of time for questions, and I have some of your questions written down here. Let me put on my hat as an economist and talk about the future. Look into my crystal ball, which I admit is really foggy. And we economists, we have a terrible track record in forecasting, but let me have a shot at it. In the Great Depression of 1930 to 1939, the economic downturn lasted. Policy measures were ineffective. And the only thing that ended the Depression was the huge outburst of demand caused by the outbreak of World War II. We could have that again. We could have a very prolonged economic downturn unless our leaders understand what they must do. It could be different. It could be more like the 1989 almost 2-decade boom, more than 2 decades, 27 years. And that boom was driven from the fall of the Berlin Wall. Europe opened, the world became globalized, we had world trade. If you look at the graph, the red line is world trade. That was the engine of global growth. We could destroy global trade and destroy the supply chains, destroy world trade. We see the Americans doing that with their trade wars. If we do that, we will have the upper graph rather than the lower one. It's crucial that countries work together to restore the benefits of globalization that we had prior to this crisis. How can we do that? There's a very simple point here, and I'll end with that, and then I'll deal with some of your questions. Economies are driven by demand. We have demand-driven economies. Demand comes from government, but mostly from individuals and families. What we call private or personal consumption. Personal consumption has crashed, absolutely crashed. It's down by 20, 30, 40%. People have lower incomes, people are unemployed, they're not spending, and even when they go back to work, they may spend less and may try to set aside more in savings just in case another crisis happens. So we're going to have deficient demand in all economies. Exports have also declined. They're a source of demand. Investment, capital formation, businesses are not going to invest for a long time. What do? How do we avoid the graph on the top part of your screen? How do we avoid a decade-long depression? Governments have to step in to supply demand when businesses and people don't spend. And they have to do this massively in a manner that is almost mind-boggling. And they have to not be concerned about the debt that they accumulate because the debt can be paid off later. But right now, the problem is demand deficiency, and only the government can supply it. And it's not clear if governments understand that point, if they get it and are willing to do that. If you listen to the central bankers, they get it. They're pumping money in the system. But who wants to borrow when we were leveraged before the crisis, and the leverage, the debt almost killed many organizations, or did kill them. So the federal banks are saying, governments, get in there. We've dumped money in the system, but there's a limit to what the money supply addition can do. Demand, we need spending. The countries that will do well will have governments that get it and that provide demand to get the wheels of the economy going again. And we're not going to wait for World War II to come along and end a 10-year depression as happened in the 30s. We need to learn from history. This graph that you see on your screen is a composite index of the strength of a range of indicators. The blue line is the advanced economies, the red line are emerging economies. It's falling off a cliff. The world economy, both wealthy countries and poor, that's falling off a cliff. The only way to get that curve back up again is through massive injection of demand, and that can only come from the government. We'll see if governments understand that. Last point, who is in charge and who should be in charge? I've looked at many countries and how they manage the crisis. In some countries, the public health authorities have been in total charge. That was the case in Israel. In some countries, the business people. President Trump seems to have in mind the large companies as people that should be assisted. The truth is, we need to have a systems approach. We need to have a task force of professionals, not politicians, and they need to combine medicine, science, technology, economy, business, and finance. And this task force together has to weigh the trade-offs and make the key decisions or recommendations. Of course, the political system has to implement them. A crisis requires systems thinking and a task force to the crisis. And very few countries have realized that and have actually followed that approach. I'm going to stop here. I'll mention a collection of my blogs. There are about 70 blogs in this book. Professor Seshadri has kindly agreed to provide the PDF to those of you who wish. You can also get it from me. My email is on the screen, and I'd be delighted to hear from you. I want to try and answer some of your questions before we have to end. Amarash asks about the status of humanity after the pandemic. I understand the question. I've written about this, Amarash. So my contribution is what I call compassionate capitalism. We need to run our businesses differently. Economists teach profit maximization. You're in business to make the most wealth and money you can for the shareholders. That will not work in the future. We can't go back to that. I'll tell you what we can go back to. We need to go back to capitalism, where businesses produce by covering their costs, including reasonable return on capital, not 40% return, reasonable return on capital, and produce at a price that people can afford. This is the model of perfect competition. We no longer have perfect competition because we have giant technology giants that dominate. They're more powerful than countries. But even the technology giants, even though they can scalp us, they must not do so. They must follow the rule of cost, pricing at cost, compassionate capitalism that will sustain the business, but it will also provide value to people. I've written about this. I'm happy to share the idea. It sounds like Don Quixote, but I think it's doable. Questions about teaching students. Many of you are professors and instructors. How do we reduce the stress that online teaching creates among students? I'm so glad you're aware of this problem. Many courses have gone online. Universities have all gone online. We at the Technion continued without missing a beat. All our courses were transferred online, but it's really tough. And I've tried to pay attention to lectures for long stretches of time, and it's very, very difficult. We need to be aware of this. We need to shorten our lectures. My own lecture today is too long. I regret that. We need to take breaks. We need to pause. We need to use a bit of music. We use humor, tell stories. We need to be aware of this stress, and we need to relearn the skill of teaching online. Many of us have been moved to teaching online without really knowing how to do it. It's a science. It's a science. There's a lot of good material from Harvard Business School about this. Check out the Harvard Business School site. They offer some very good insights, but good for you for being aware of the problem. Kieran asked about minimalism and creativity. That's a wonderful question, the connection between them. There's going to be a massive shortage of resources in the world because of the government debt and deficits, massive deficits. The only solution is going to be creativity. Use our creative minds, and instead of throwing money at problem, we throw our creative minds at the problem. How can we find a minimal solution that uses minimal resources to help our planet and at the same time create value? This is going to be a whole new endeavor, a whole new industry, minimalist creativity. Can we create value for people by reusing things, by not using massive amounts of resources? That's a really good question. There's a question about remote work. So my niece has been working remotely and covering her job. Millions of people all over the world have moved toward remote working. And companies have discovered, hey, we can save money by doing this. We can reduce traffic jams by doing this. So after this crisis, we're going to see many companies allowing people to do much more of their work from home, helping their family life, saving money, saving traffic jams. The companies that adjust to this most quickly, flexibility, agility, resilience, the ones able to organize work from home quickly, they will be the ones who win. I know a company called Checkpoint. It's a market leader in firewall protection. They have 5,400 employees. They prefer to work from the office because they have very, very sensitive technology, and they have moved 3,000 people to work at home, and they've done that really quickly. Many organizations have done that. Thank you for that question. Maybe I can take one more question. There are 41 questions here. At the end of the broadcast, I'm going to copy paste the questions you asked and I will do my best to answer them all. um, so let me quickly, Swati, my friend Swati. Swati asks, while agility and resilience are key to innovation, but the organizations which are huge cannot make changes swiftly, how should they act? So there's a wonderful book called Elephants Can Dance. It's mainly about IBM. IBM is a huge organization. And the answer, Swati, is that large organizations absolutely have no choice. They have to learn to dance, especially now. They have to learn to make changes swiftly and to welcome those changes and to implement them as if they were a small organization. This is a key point. So if you work with a large organization, work for it, teach it, you need to help them figure out, okay, the history is gone. We live in new times, and we need to figure out how we can dance, even as a big organizations. Organizations that are large and slow and cumbersome, they're just not going to make it. In the market reshuffle, there are going to be tiny, agile organizations that move up quickly, unless the big guys figure it out and figure out how to change quickly. So I've run out of time. It's 12 noon in India, 10:30 here in Israel. I want to thank Arnaz for initiating and organizing this webcast. Somia, the Associate Director of Institute of Healthcare Management. Thanks to the Indian School of Business. Thanks to my friend Seshadri for suggesting this. And most of all, special thanks to the 330 participants, and there are still 330 of you who are with me, and I appreciate it. Make a note of my email. If you have questions, send them to me. I respond quickly. Thank you very much for your attention and for joining this webcast. So
Shlomo,
I'm saying,
if I may just conclude this
yep.
on behalf of ISB, the Max Institute, then the EHAC and the ISP Center for B2B Markets, and all the participants. From the comments that have been popping up, I think they said it was a brilliant session. For them, it was an eye-opener. I saw a lot of comments, for example, your perspective on social distancing. People loved it. It doesn't have to be physical distancing is one thing, but it doesn't have to be social distancing. But nevertheless, I think it's a great privilege for us to have had the opportunity to listen to you. Thank you also for the offer to share your newly released book to all the participants free of cost. We'll be sure to email it to them. In case you don't get it in the next 1 week, please reach out to Arnaz or to Soumya and we will email it to you. And I think we had from the horse's mouth, Israel is the hotbed of innovation of all kinds. It was absolutely a delightful pleasure to see such stalwarts being brought so simply. Their whole life of work is brought so simply, and you say, wow, this is incredible. Also, Shlomo writes almost every day 1 or 2 or more blogs, and it's very easy to get hold of those, the blog ID. And it will be good for you if you want to follow this on an ongoing basis. He's prolific in his writing. I don't know where he gets the time to read, write, and so on. But he gets to work very early in the morning and knocks off quite late in the evening. Very, very prolific. So thank you again, Shlomo, and it's an honor for us to have you chat with us. Good day.
Thank you, Seshadri. Have a good day. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
So, Soumya, I'm signing off.